guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you're new here. My name is Mo, and today's video is one I've wanted to do for a while because I've talked at length about dark academia books, but the question that I first had when I started reading the genre was, what is dark academia and where did it come from? So that's what today's video is. We're going to dive into the history of dark academia, talk about the influences behind it, the books, the media, the people, etc., as well as some of the fashion tidbits and the history of the genre. So sit back, relax, get a cup of tea, and let's get into it, shall we? Academia is defined as an internet aesthetic and subculture concerned with higher education, the arts and literature, or an idealized version thereof. The aesthetic centers on traditional educational clothing, interior design, and activities such as writing, poetry, ancient art, classic literature, as well as classical Greek and collegiate Gothic architecture. Dark academia can essentially be summed up as penny loafers and a hot coffee on the way to class in the fall. The genre exists as sort of a loose interpretation of an amalgamation of ideas, almost all vague and always vintage. In terms of clothing, think tweed blazers and turtlenecks, long billowing coats, wire-framed glasses, and tons of ties. When it comes to buildings, think brick and dark oak, sprawling green fields and spiral staircases, dusty classrooms with book-lined walls. Much of dark academia exists as sort of a living history, allowing those who enjoy the genre to either reminisce on some unnamed time gone by, or at the very least, hunt for a dupe of the oversized fisherman knit their distinguished English professor wore last Thursday. This vague sense of nostalgia keeps fans of the work on an everlasting ghost hunt for the tangible quality of yesteryear. Not much is actually known about the creation of dark academia, although most sources credit Donna Tartt's 1992 novel, The Secret History, as a defining moment for the genre, although works like Oscar Wilde's A Picture of Dorian Gray and Maurice by E.M. Foster have been credited as classic dark academia. What sets Tartt apart from her contemporaries is not only her choice to set The Secret History on a campus, but also the way that campus acts as an active participant in the narrative, serving almost as an omnipresent foil to the protagonist. Much of the action that unfolds in Hamden is crucial to the plot. Had it occurred somewhere else with some other professor, the story could have taken a drastically different turn. This distinction is what separates dark academia from its predecessor, the campus novel. While traditional campus novels often center on the Bildungsroman-inspired journey of the main character, they typically focus on the institution's faculty or political climate. However, dark academia delves into the insular lives of the college students at these elite, isolated universities. And it's in this decision the biggest differentiation between the two is created. Deciding to focus on students instead of the staff allows the readers to become privy to secrets and insights that the young protagonist seemingly remain oblivious to. This bird's eye view of the moral ambiguity displayed by the upper echelon is a rarity, and it provides a unique lens through which we can observe the vulnerabilities of this privileged population. The protagonists may be unreliable narrators, but they are often terrible liars. But dark academia doesn't just extend to the aesthetic of the university or its student population. It's also about reputation and exclusivity. The core focus of most dark academia media lays heavily on the age and esteem of whatever higher education institute the protagonist attends. Some of them are thin pseudonyms for places, think Bennington and Hamden, while other novels like R.F. Kuang's Babel just straight up name Oxford and other notable universities. You also have the fictional ones like Hogwarts from Harry Potter or Welton Academy in Dead Poets Society. Although these individual institutions all share similarities, their individual ethos and lore all aid in shaping the novel or piece of media they're focused on. I found this quote in a personal essay on dark academia by Adrienne Raphael that pretty much sums up this idea. It goes as follows. Harvard is brick Bostonian Brahim, J-press and cross-dressing, and deep mahogany encased inside. Princeton is Oxonian Gothic plus new money wood glass. Yale is Gothic on the outside with the Georgian interior courtyard and streets you cannot cross at night. Christ Church is Harry Potter, and Cambridge is the secret best. And if those words make absolutely no sense to you, well, It's because they're not supposed to. Historically and intentionally, the niche experiences within dark academia have been gatekept for a certain sect of society. And in the West, that literally boils down to two things: rich and white. Beyond the aesthetic allure of students and their surroundings, dark academia can be categorized by several distinct tropes. Common themes readers might come across include toxic relationships, secret societies, enigmatic mentors with morally ambiguous motivations, and a very typical fish out of water scenario where the protagonist is the complete antithesis of the elites he attends university with. However, what truly sets dark academia apart from other literary genres is how the chosen field of study often profoundly influences the story's trajectory. Take M.L. Rio's If We Were Villains, for instance. The story revolves around a tightly knit group of Shakespeare students whose growing affinity for brute force and interpersonal manipulation ultimately culminate in the murder of their close friend, all while they rehearsed the play Julius Caesar. What was on the page has now become real life, and it's the same for many other characters in dark academia. Mere academic pursuit is insufficient. They must fully embody their chosen discipline to feel like they belong, forgoing sleep to cram for exams, substituting self-care with cigarettes and coffee, and romanticizing these habits as integral to the intellectual experience. Where dark academia really distinguishes itself from the rest of the pack is by presenting this selective concept of who is entitled to engage with its themes and why. Arguably, this exclusivity enhances the genre's overall allure, as it creates a unique and compelling environment where access to knowledge, privilege, and ambition seemingly intertwined. And by doing so, emphasizing these intricate relationships and moral complexities amongst its characters and the various institutions, dark academia truly invites readers to explore the shadow side of higher learning, often offering a critique of the very elite environment it depicts. Because of its nostalgia for the past, dark academia exists as sort of an eternal echo chamber, one where trends and news headlines are completely irrelevant to the point of being satirical. Think The Secret Histories Henry Winter being unaware that a man had landed on the moon. Him pretending this modern progress hadn't happened allowed him to momentarily slow down the forward momentum that was ever present in the 80s. With that being said though, it does bear specific hallmarkers that let the reader know what idea or time period they were going for. Much of dark academia draws its inspiration from the American collegiate uniforms of the 1920s to the 1960s, an era when many Western universities enforced strict dress codes. Imagine the hallowed halls of Yale and Harvard, where students once donned formal attire for midday and evening meals in the dining hall. These traditions were imposed in response to alumni who viewed the rebellious spirit of the civil rights activists and anti-establishment students of the 1950s and 60s as a threat to the reputation of these esteemed institutions. And that's because until the mid-20th century, higher education was largely a privilege reserved for white men of significant wealth and status, with most blue and white-collar jobs of the time not requiring the traditional 4-year bachelor degree, which makes dark academia all the more alluring. Its protagonists don't just attend any college. The genre is populated by exceptionally bright, ultra-wealthy students who seemingly devote themselves to pursuits often deemed extravagant by wider society. In today's world, where many grapple with record high inflation and predatory private loans, dark academia invites readers to indulge in the dream of a life where knowledge reigns unburdened by the financial realities of the modern age. But the downside of longing for this time gone by is that in doing so, it allows the reader to ignore the chain of events that led to this death of culture. Take our current societal climate, for example. A college degree is almost essential to success and upward societal mobility. And because of its necessity, it has become common. No longer are degrees reserved for the children of bankers and Hollywood actors who want to spend long afternoons laying under trees and reading Chaucer. Nowadays, classes are larger and packed with way more students who all come from a varying area of backgrounds. Rightfully so. After 1951 saw Brown versus Board of Education, American schools started to desegregate en masse over the next 20 years. This movement led Black and brown families to be given, for the first time, access to higher learning facilities after graduation, meaning they could then go into the job market to compete for jobs against upper to middle-class white men. This led to workers understanding the ability they had to hire Black and brown men and pay them significantly lower wages than their white counterparts. Couple this with an already extremely competitive job market during the boom years, and you have a powder keg. Though federal law would dictate all schools must desegregate, busing laws, redlining, gerrymandering, all of these issues would start to choke the upward momentum Black and brown people were given access towards proper education. And this would go on to be reflected in the rising tuition costs of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. As prior to desegregation, most higher learning facilities relied on the work of enslaved or disenfranchised people to function. In a striking revelation from a 2022 expose, the Presidential Committee on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery uncovered irrefutable documentation revealing that Harvard's rise to prominence hinged on the exploitation of enslaved people. The report documents the money accrued by the school in its infancy, and it specifically names 6 individuals: James Perkins, Benjamin Boozy, John McLean, Abbott Lawrence, and Peter Brooks, all of whom derived their wealth from various forms of slave and plantation crop trading in the Americas and the Caribbean. Ever heard of McLean Hospital, made famous by Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar or Susanna Kaysen's Girl Interrupted? Well, it was made possible by the donation of a wealthy shipping merchant who allegedly insured slave ships at a hefty price. Or perhaps you've heard of Harvard Law School, which was established with funding from Isaac Royale Jr., a notorious slave owner responsible for the execution of 88 individuals following a failed rebellion on his family's plantation in Antigua. Harvard hasn't exactly shied away from this legacy. In 1936, a committee was formed to create a coat of arms for each school within the university. The coat of arms for the law school being 3 barrels of wooden wheat, serving as a tribute to Royale and his so-called family farm. This celebration and remembrance persisted until a student-led protest in 2016 prompted Martha Minow, the Dean of Studies, to address the issue with the crest and ultimately establish a committee to redesign it. Alongside this decision was an announcement detailing the installation of a plaque honoring 4 enslaved individuals, Titus, Venus, Bilal, and Juba, who once resided at Wadsworth House, the second oldest building on campus, named after Benjamin Wadsworth, a former president of Harvard. Harvard is not alone in this effort. Universities such as Georgetown, Brown, Columbia, McGill, Tufts, Yale, Emory, among others, came together to create a consortium of 80 distinguished institutions committed to recognizing and educating students on their connections to slavery. Harvard has also pledged $100 million in grants to be given to the descendants of enslaved laborers, as well as scholarship opportunities for students of color. So combine all of this history with the ever-rising costs of the 1980s, fueled by then-Governor and future former President Ronald Reagan and his views towards privatized student loans. Plus, down here, you have the ever-expanding GI Bill of the 1940s. And the picture of higher education in the West, especially at the Ivy League, becomes less than favorable. So, despite all of this, why does it remain so appealing? Why do so many people aspire to attend these universities? Outside of all of the other reasons we already know, one of the main ones is escapism. Whether it's the allure of studying in historic buildings surrounded by a wealth of knowledge and culture, or the yearning for a time free from the pressures of adulthood, dark academia offers a space where individuals can project their aspirations without needing to confront real-life experiences. By observing this phenomenon from a distance, one almost adopts an anthropological perspective, gaining insight into the lives of others. In this way, the genre reflects the reader, who examines those who study and what their pursuits reveal about them. How meta for such a philosophical genre. Personally, though, I believe much of the genre's popularity stems from how contemporary authors have found innovative ways to subvert traditional norms, especially by depicting protagonists as outsiders. Remember I mentioned that fish out of water trope. In Babel, Robin Swift is a Chinese immigrant raised in Britain, struggling with what it truly means to exist amongst the elite of a colonial empire. In The Secret History, Richard Papin is a scholarship student lying about his life in California with little to no avail. Both are outsiders in their own ways, united only by their expressed passion for the subjects they explore alongside their peers. Yet, both face a similar set of circumstances. This specific emphasis on socioeconomic disparity, extending beyond race to include class, is a perfect example of what I was talking about. It shows the lengths to which authors of dark academia go to reveal its inherently exclusionary nature. Choosing specifically to highlight this takes the novel from merely a critique of discrimination to a satirical comedy on the very ideals the protagonist aspires to. Donna Tartt's The Secret History serves both as a love letter and critical expose of Bennington, revealing that the romanticized notion of a life free from stress and political turmoil, along with the allure of familiar stories, kind of creates a nostalgic safety that ultimately distorts reality. And it makes sense, considering Donna Tartt grew up relatively poor in rural Mississippi. She, much like Richard, was a scholarship student who spent most of her time at Bennington as the only girl amongst rich, wealthy men. The rise of dark academia on platforms like TikTok can be viewed through the lens of this current digital denialism phenomenon we have going on, where individuals kind of engage with curated online content that idealizes or romanticizes certain lifestyles, experiences, or realities. And those are often in contrast to the person's lived experiences. I've noticed people often do this when they believe the internet to be one world and the real world another separate entity, meaning their online self can embody everything that their physical may not. This digital denialism also aids in terms of aesthetic, with students forgoing laptops for typewriters and Spotify playlists for vinyls. It's like, remember that scene in The Secret History where Henry buys the $300 Mont Blanc pen to try and failingly emulate Julian, and Richard is just surprised that there's other pens out there besides ballpoint? Dare I say, playing in two completely different ball games. All right. During the pandemic and quarantine, many found themselves grappling with isolation and uncertainty, leading to a longing for structure and meaning. This collective pause from the fast-paced, competitive, capitalistic rat race allowed individuals to fantasize about a life steeped in intellectual pursuits reminiscent of the leisurely, studious atmospheres portrayed in dark academia. As people spent their days at home with newfound free time, they turned to idealized narratives of scholarship and artistry. In this context, dark academia became more of an aesthetic, especially factoring in new graduates who had their first 2 college years stolen away from them due to the pandemic. No longer were they studying in the old libraries at the universities they had worked hard to get into for 4 years, but instead were set trapped in their home bedrooms learning through a little screen. In this context, dark academia became more than an aesthetic. It transformed into a coping mechanism, providing solace in a world where the pleasures of academia felt momentarily suspended. After the pandemic, TikTok solidified its presence in our daily lives, further fueling this yearning for an idealized existence. Attending university in person became less essential. Instead, individuals could indulge in day-in-the-life vlogs from students, immerse themselves in curated playlists, look at book recommendations or outfit inspirations that allowed them to live out their academic fantasies. And while this virtual engagement on some level satisfies our desires, it raises some important questions about what we really want as a society. Yes, college can be tough and overwhelming, but it's a journey worth pursuing if you want to. Yet TikTok often convinces us that these curated experiences are sufficient, erasing the complexities of actual academic life. This fixation on an idealized yet unexperienced reality has led to the TikTokification of dark academia, boiling it down to another mega popular microtrend where problematic histories and toxic mindsets are conveniently ignored. And like with most fandoms, the enthusiasts of dark academia defend their views passionately, often overlooking any critical or problematic nuances. Like, try explaining to a true Secret History fan that Henry Winter, at best, was a sociopath who exploited his friends to serve his own needs under the influence of his homoerotic, devious professor. The response to that comment is literally just going to be a collage slideshow of what Secret History character you are with like some coffee, a cigarette, and a tweed blazer. It just further highlights how discussions once steeped in intellectualism have just succumbed to this TikTok brain rot. All in all, dark academia is an enchanting yet often misleading world, one free from the true intellectual growth and personal connections that happen in the messy reality of college. Sure, sipping lattes in an LLB barn coat while discussing the moral ambiguities of Seneca sounds dreamy, but it's the late night study sessions, tailgates, internships, genuine friendships, and yes, even the stress of exams that ultimately shape our experiences. Main takeaway from this video is just try to maintain a healthy balance, Watch Real Housewives while you shop on Vinted. Read Caligula while you file for your Jewel class action lawsuit. Just get out there and embrace the beautifully complicated world of higher learning. And maybe, just maybe, the ghost of Henry Winter will bless you at the thrift store with a Mont Blanc pen. Okay, bye guys.